Hello guys, welcome to another SSA video, and today we're going to be talking about the long jump. Now if you could smash subscribe, that would really help this channel out a lot. You can also check out our Facebook pages, one to do specifically on training, but also another one just on what the club does. Also, we train down at Garren's at Southend. We will train your children personally. The takeoff is highly important in long jump. Basically, the more speed we can get into the board, the further and higher we can jump. Now, height is also important for the jump, because if we can get height, you can, in theory, get more distance, because the higher you go, relatively, the further you will go, because you're further off the ground. Utilize that momentum, you hit the board, and you drive and you push off. Now, when we do our run-up, we usually do it over a certain number of strides. But that is not exactly an accurate way of measuring it. Another way you can do is to measure it using pigeon steps, putting one foot in front of the other. That's fine, but still not particularly that accurate, and especially if you're working with children, because let's face it, they seem to be ever growing all the time.
With younger athletes, you generally want them just to learn how to hit the board or get within the vicinity of the board. To work out the strides from the run-up, you put their heel by the plasticine and you get them to run a certain number of strides. You don't necessarily need to tell them how many number of strides, because some of them will just hop or skip or slow down or try and overstride when they get to that point. In other words, they don't run normally, they don't sprint normally to that point, because they're consciously thinking about their run-up, or they miscount their number of strides. A more mentally mature athlete might be able to count their number of strides back and have absolutely no problem. So you need to know your individual athlete and what works best for them. When we're working with older athletes, they're generally more confident in their abilities, they're grown into their bodies, so they have an understanding of hitting the board. Having their heel by the plasticine means they'll probably miss the board. So what we want to do is have their heel exactly on the plasticine. You can see that their foot will get more precise measurements to the board.
A more accurate way of measuring it is with a tape measure, and you work out the run-up first, get them doing a few jumps, see if they're hitting the board properly, then you measure the actual run-up. Now when it comes to the long jump itself, we want to have our fastest point at the very end of the run-up. When we're coming into the board, we're at the board, we're at our fastest, because we want to utilize that speed in order to get really far, really high, really long jump.
The long jump run-up comprises of 3 phases: an alignment phase, an acceleration phase, and an attack phase. The acceleration phase is very similar to that of a 100, 200 or 400 meter sprinter. It is very deliberate, and it's all about driving and getting power out. Build up your momentum. However, it must be controlled in order to enable you to have rhythm. If you are reckless, you may have trouble hitting the ball and or having to slow down in order to hit the board, or stutter in order to hit the board. Therefore, your jump will not be as far and you will not be as fast. The alignment or coming up phase is the phase where we seamlessly transition into our main running phase with power, speed and being completely upright, therefore enabling longer stride length. With 3 to 5 strides out from the board, we want to attack it with as much speed as possible. The last stride we shorten in order to be able to dip our hips to get higher on the jump. Head forward and keep tall, as this will prevent you from collapsing or over-rotating forward when you jump.
Now there's a number of styles people utilize. You see some people do a little skip, it seems, or they seem to rock back and roll in. That's fine. They all have their relative purposes and they will be worked for different individuals. What we want though is speed at the board. For the vast majority of people, if they were to go hammer and tong as fast as they can, they would slow down by the start of the board. So we want to wind and build it up. We build up the speed until we're super quick at the board and we take off. Also, for some people, if they go super quick, they miss their timing. They miss their rhythm and they might overstep the board. Likewise, vice versa. If we go too slow, then you take off too close to the board. Likewise, if you don't go quick enough and you don't build that speed up, you won't jump as far. So ideally, we want basically the first 3 strides you build in, you build that pace up, you get really, really quick, you hit that board. That's what I personally did when I used to do long jump, when I used to do decathlon. Now, some people like to just go quick from the start, and that's also good. So you need to figure out what works best for your athlete. Now, if you could smash subscribe, that would really help this channel out a lot. You can also check out our Facebook pages, one to do specifically on training, but also another one just on what the club does. Also, we train down at Garren's at Southend. So if you want to join the club, you can do. We will train your children personally. When it comes to the takeoff, we really need to focus on the 3 strides into that board.
Now, these terms are often used interchangeably, but for the benefit of this video, we're going to separate them to make it sure that it's more understandable. The reason why we're focusing on the last 3 strides is that because we transition in from our running phase, from the run up, into that approach onto the actual takeoff itself. And the last 3 strides are often different. You may do a shorter stride in order to get that hips down low and drive up high to get vertical height. Not only does the approach allow for the transition from a run into the vertical motion, it also helps us with the rhythm of the actual jump itself. On the approach, the last 3 strides are very much different to the rest of the run-up. First stride in is more off the toes, whereas the second stride, the penultimate stride, is more flat-footed. You then take a shorter stride into the board, which allows you to drop the hips and drive up high into your vertical jump. It should look a bit like these photos here. One way we can develop that takeoff rhythm from the last 3 strides of the approach is through the use of mats, using them as a visual guide to tell us to run through on the toes, drop the heel, shorten the stride, and develop and jump through into the jump. This can help as a visual cue to your athletes. A good long jumper should have awareness of their foot placement relatively towards the board, and they should always look forward when doing so. This would help them improve their long jump. The sinking of the hips and raising them forward again from takeoff causes the last 3 strides to be uniquely different to how we would normally teach athletes to sprint. This usually results in the penultimate stride to be longer than normal and the final stride to be up to 25 centimeters shorter. It must be emphasized that the hip sink and stride adjustment all happens in response to the athlete's postural adjustments in preparation for the takeoff. A takeoff ensures the hips are slightly forward of the shoulders.
The takeoff is highly important in long jump. Basically, the more speed we can get into the board, the further and higher we can jump. Now, height is also important for the jump, because if we can get height, you can, in theory, get more distance, because the higher you go, relatively, the further you will go, because you're further off the ground. Utilize that momentum, you hit the board, and you drive and you push off. When it comes to the takeoff, we need to get speed into the board in order to jump further. So when we are jumping, we want to hit the board with as much speed as possible. The fastest point has to be at the board itself. So we come into the board, we drop out and sink our hips slightly, and bam, we drive up with it. Now the dropping of the hips allows us to drive and push our hips forward. It allows us to get height off the board. We can do drills with 3 strides out, working on that action, working on driving up from that board. Also, what we can seem to focus on is driving that knee up, getting that knee high, getting the body high and tall. As we do that, that should help us get that height. Drop the hips slightly and pow. There are 2 styles. I know the Americans like to really get low and drive up.
Jos puhuttiin, että Rees on kova kisaaja, niin katsokaapa tätä. Aivan
But that can sometimes, that massive drop in your hips can also make you not jump as far, relatively than just a narrow one and coming up. It also depends on how strong that athlete is and whether they can utilise that massive force and not collapse on takeoff. Now there are a number of exercises you can do, doing jumping lunges, that can also help. Try and drive off a box with in this action, with your knee in the air, that also helps.
To work in our run up, we can use mats to help with the foot placement of those free strides and with the accuracy of the takeoff. When taking off from the board, you want to drive your knee up as quickly as possible. The vertical impulse is achieved by the upward acceleration of the free limbs, the arms and the non-takeoff leg, against the braced leg takeoff leg. These movements should be characterized by a short radius, blocked, fast, explosive action. When working with children and discovering their takeoff feet, what you can do is just get them to jump and see which feels more comfortable. Alternatively, you can tell them to fall over forward slightly and see which foot comes first. However, there is some evidence that maybe kids should learn how to jump bilaterally in order to strengthen their leg, because what they think might be their best foot might actually not be their best takeoff foot, and there's going to be times when they jump when they don't actually jump off their proper takeoff foot for whatever reason. When the takeoff foot is placed on the board, it is slightly advanced to the jumper's hips and should strike the board on the midline. The head should be carried in a normal position in line with the spine and the eyes facing forward. Your head facing forward, not looking down.
There are two schools of thought concerning how the takeoff foot should be brought into contact with the ground in the long jump. The first advocates a so-called active landing, in which the foot is brought to the ground in a backward sweeping, or pawing movement, minimizing the loss in horizontal velocity experienced during the takeoff. The second school advocates a locking placement, in which the foot is neither moving forward nor backward relative to the center of gravity of the athlete at the instant of contact with the ground, facilitating the increase in the vertical velocity. In general, when planning the foot at takeoff, the initial contact should be flat-footed, with heel contact kept to a minimum. The action is kept on the ball and the outer arch of the foot.
Either technique you utilize, you still have to use a dynamic down and back motion with the foot at takeoff. In other words, you got to claw the floor, claw the board and push up onto the toes, and this will give you the transition from your horizontal to your vertical. It is important to drive the free leg forwards and up at takeoff. Fully extend the hip, knees and ankle. This can be developed using lunges, jumping off a box into a pit, or even more advanced exercises like Russian horse jumps.
Another area of the body that often gets ignored is your arms. Trying to drive up and get into this position with your chest forward, hips up, hips forward, chest forward, and driving the arms back. Driving the arms back in order to help generate the height. At this point in the long jump, it's all about generation of height going forward in that direction.
The hitch kick action generally involves the athlete running off the board and moving their arms in a windmill action, or at least preparing to do so. There is a running technique action you come off the board, and there also is a half hang between the hitch kick.
At this point in the jump, we've got to avoid over-rotating forward. If we don't get our legs out in front in time and bring our arms forward, we risk over-rotating. And if we over-rotate, you effectively move forward and you kill that arc. You kill that lovely arc we generated from the run-up. And in theory, you don't jump as far.
Now, just a reminder of what happens at takeoff. The vertical impulse is achieved by the upward acceleration of the free limbs, the arms and the non-takeoff leg against the brace leg on the ground. The brace leg, the takeoff leg. These movements should be characterized by a short radius, fast, explosive actions. And this initiates the vertical jump.
Try and drive off a box with in this action with your knee in the air. That also helps. Working another area of the body that often gets ignored is your arms. Trying to drive up and get into this position with your chest forward. Hips up, hips forward, chest forward, and driving the arms back, or driving the arms back in order to help generate the height. At this point in the long jump, it's all about generation of height going forward in that direction.
The speed and lift generated on the runway and through the takeoff can result in a good distance. After takeoff, the athletes tend to have a forward rotation that, if not corrected, will result with the feet hitting the sand early and a loss of distance in the jump. The cyclic forward movements of the leg and the arms, as seen in the hitch kick for example, will correct this forward rotation. Nonetheless, having your arms back and pushing your hips forward, if you're strong enough, can also prevent this. Now, there are three main styles of flight through the air when we do long jump: the stride, the hang, and the hitch kick. For the stride jump style, the athlete maintains a takeoff position for as long as possible, and only as the athlete comes into the land does the takeoff leg join the free leg for a good landing position. It basically looks like you're trying to hurdle through the air and then bring your legs together for your leg shoot. Now, out of the three styles of jump, this is the one that's least used. It is also the one that uses the least amount of needs the least amount of technical efficiency in order to be able to perform. Therefore, you see a lot of youngsters or beginners utilize this style of long jump when they first begin, before moving on to maybe a hang technique. The hang technique, which involves the athlete seemingly looking like they're hanging in the air with their arms behind them, with their legs behind them, but the hips forced forwards. The arms go overhead to slow down the rotation about the athlete's center of gravity, and only do the legs and the arms come together for the leg shoot in order to prevent over rotation, and they only do this at the last minute in order to make sure you gain as much distance as you possibly can with a good leg shoot. The hitch kick is like a cycling action through the air with the legs and arms, in a windmill action with the arms. Now, there are two types of hitch kick. You've got the new version, the hybrid version of the hitch hang, and you've got the traditional cycling windmill hitch kick. Hitch kick is often used by individuals who, for whatever reason, don't seem to get much height or vertical height of the board, and therefore rotating the legs around helps to extend that amount of time in the air. But also for people who over rotate on the hang technique and often come down early, to prevent that, you have this cycling windmill action of the hitch kick, which prevents them over rotating on that arc. In reality, when we do the long jump itself, the movements through the air don't necessarily gain you distance as per se, but instead prevent over or under rotation, making sure you're able to get your leg shoot out and able to claw and get as much distance as possible. With it, the distance is generated from the run up and the takeoff. You might not necessarily be able to gain distance when during the flight phase of the long jump, but you certainly can lose it from over or under rotation. Now, with the hang, or the classic hang in particular, you drive the freestanding leg up and push your hips forward and move your arms and legs back in order to create that classic C-like pose. The open the hips out help us to get our leg shoot out. Now, the arms need to move through and over throughout the process of the long jump, moving from their backwards behind the body position over into their forward leg shoot position. Now, the second main type of long jump style is the hitch kick, and there is a hybrid variation of the hitch kick and the hang, although not very often used. It's often used by people who are moving on from a hang style into a hitch kick. The hitch hang involves the bottom half being more of a hitch kick style with a slight bit of a hang possibly, and the arms of a hang technique. Now, the difference with this guy's variation is that he's forcing his leg a lot further forward, almost like a stride technique. Now, what is different about the hitch hang technique is the motion off the board is like a running action. Yes, you can get different styles. In the normal hang technique, you can utilize the operation of running off the board. However, that's more reserved for the hitch kick. And the reason being it's more reserved for the hitch kick is because you're running off the board and pushing that leg out and cycling that leg through rather than hanging in the air. Now, the hitch hang revolves around you being able to have your leg, your front leg, further out in front of you, almost like a hitch kick, while the freestanding leg is brought out in front and the standing leg is brought in behind, almost like a hang. The signature of the hitch kick is the arms working like a windmill. However, in most times they work counterintuitively to the rest of the body. By working in opposite directions with your arms going backwards and your legs rotating forward, you prevent the over rotation that could kill your long jump flight. The main problem with the hang technique is that when we are doing the hang, we are trying to drive our hips forward and push our legs and arms behind us. Now, this can create under rotation if you do this far too early within the jump. Now, it can look impressive when you bring your leg shoot out, but that's only because with the hang technique,
It enables us greater ability to be able to get that leg shoot out. But what it does, it decreases that parabellum. It can prevent us, or if you like, create an under rotation where we rotate backwards, preventing us from getting the height, getting that perfect arc, perfectly smooth arc. Now, having our head up, looking up rather than looking forward, can also increase the chance of under rotation or rotating backwards. There is also a risk that we don't drive up and do that so-called Russian horse jump, that lunge in the air. And that's enable us to drive off the board and get into the height and allow us to get our flight action, get our hang out. If we don't do that, then that can create potentially great massive backwards rotation or massive forward rotation, which in turn kills the flight and means you get less distant. Now, the main problem with over-rotation in the hitch kick is that if we don't get into that Russian horse jump technique, or we leave that Russian horse jump and go straight, leading with that front leg straight out in front, it creates an imbalance throughout the air. And through rotational and forward momentum and forces, it throws us down into the sandpit, therefore killing that parabellum, that arc, and resultantly less distance. You don't jump as far. Now, what I mean by a Russian horse jump, it's that technique of driving up into that lunge position with the free leg out in front and the driving takeoff leg behind. This is what you do on takeoff. That will mimic what you do in the air, as shown by these Russian athletes we filmed in Alphamar. Now, how we hit the board ultimately depends on what style of technique we're utilizing for our flight. If we run off the board, we're going to more likely be able to do a hitch kick, or more likely be doing a hitch kick. If we are placing it underneath us and dragging, we're more likely doing a hang technique. But this is not set in stone. There is no one method throughout the air that will make you jump further. However, it's all down to personal preference. Some of the biggest jumps in history have been from the hitch, or they've been from the hang, or they've been from a hybrid, or they've been from something that no one has ever seen before. Whatever you do should be best for you. It doesn't matter which style you utilize, as long as you get a massive jump from it. And it best works around your limitations and what you do best as a long jumper. What's better, the hang or the hitch kick? I posted a couple of shorts, one with Rebecca Chapman doing a hang technique, illustrating how her technique has now changed with a comparison of the hitch kick technique. Rebecca Chapman is 8th in the country, but was previously 4th in Britain. 2009, she was 82nd in her age. If Rebecca Chapman was allowed into the 2009 Youth World Championship, she would have come 2nd from last. Grey line above the average of the World League, blue being her PB or season's best, the oranges are her averages. So what is better, the hitch or the hang? There is probably going to be one better for some people, but it's all an individual difference. What is best for you? In the case of Rebecca Chapman, the hitch kick, that variation was the best for her, but it was all the other things she did along that way, and a little bit of luck as well, that has made her a better jumper. Hi guys, welcome back to another SSA Athletics video on the long jump series. Now, if you want to watch the long jump series, you can do. It's not particularly necessary in order to be able to enjoy and understand this video. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the landing, or more specifically, the leg shoot. Now, if you could smash subscribe, that would really help this channel out a lot. You can also check out our Facebook pages, one to do specifically on training, but also another one just on what the club does. Also, we train down at Garren's at Southend. So if you want to join the club, you can do. We will train your children personally. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to land in the long jump pit. The leg shoot is an important part of long jump, and quite a lot of distance can be lost on that part of the actual jump. What you find with many people, especially if they go flat, they won't necessarily get enough time to slingshot their legs forward and land and be able to maintain or maximize the distance in which they jump. When we go through the air, we go through, or if you're doing a bicycle action, we finally get to the point where we need to bring both our legs forward. So from here, keeping our bodies tall, not trying to get 45-degree angles. And as we, at the point where we're about to land, we bring our feet forward like so, and we bring our arms forward in this action here at the last moment to maximize the distance in which we gain horizontally across the sandpit. Another exercise you can do to improve one's long jump from the board and try and improve your takeoff is by doing a jumping lunge into the pit. An exercise you can do to work on a leg shoot if you're utilizing a traditional method of leg shoot and a traditional method of jump is to take 2 strides in, jump off the board and slingshot your legs forward, but don't retract the leg shoot. You're effectively landing in an almost seated position. I would only utilize that with more experienced athletes and not young children. Alternatively, you can work jumping off a box or a trampette or some other equipment that will help you get more height. And if you get more height, you get more time, you get used to jumping higher, jumping further, and also get used to holding that leg shoot for longer.
Extend the legs out in front of us when we're landing. That is known as the leg shoot. We land with the heels first, bending the knees to absorb the momentum. Regardless of whether you're utilising a hang or a hitch kick, all long jumpers will utilise a Russian horse jump technique. Yes, I know this is Jonathan Edwards, but he has a really good leg shoot. That's the reason why we're going to talk about it. Jonathan Edwards brings his legs underneath him, brings his arms over and shoots his legs out in front of him, hence the name the leg shoot. This allows him to maximise his distance when he does triple jump. The action of the hitch kick allows an athlete who's potentially flat through the air to maintain their balance as they do the long jump. Notice, however, that if you're doing 1.5 or even 2.5 rotations with the legs, this can cause your leg shoot to be slightly shorter than the hang. Thusly, they don't necessarily get their legs out as far as someone who does a hang technique. Regardless of what technique we're utilizing for our flight, we don't want to rotate through the air like this gentleman here. We want to keep the legs out in front of us, but how we land on the pit is going to be different depending on the athlete and what they do with their leg shoot. In essence, when we do the leg shoot and we land, we extend the legs out in front at landing and land with the heels first, bending with the knees to absorb momentum. Athletes will try and bend down and claw into the sand to try and minimise the amount of impact they make on the sand, as demonstrated by Jonathan Edwards here, and by this video of Carl Lewis. Now, the perfect position for a leg shoot will be to have your legs directly out in front and landing like so while trying to avoid your bum hitting the ground. But that's not always possible for every athlete. And you'll notice as they land, they will twist and contort their body to the side. During the landing, the athlete is aiming to get their heels as far away from the takeoff board as it is possible. The ideal position is shown by this diagram, with the dotted line representing the projected flight path of the body's centre of gravity. The heels will need to land just before the projected flight path to ensure the athlete does not fall back into the sand. As the feet contact the sand, press the heels downward and contract the hamstrings, causing the hips to rise. As the hips rise, twist them to one side, which allows for forward momentum to carry the body past the landing position. A useful drill to help develop the leg shoot is the utilization of a crash pad and doing a leg drop on it. Also, if you are doing a hitch kick, you may want to practice holding yourself up on a bar and cycling your legs through to help that action as you do through the flight phase. And this can then be transitioned back onto our pad when we jump off boxes, then onto a crash pad, for instance.
Now guys, I hope that really helped. Smash subscribe, check out our other social media platforms, and I will see you in the next long jump video.